All right, ready to dive in today. We're going deep on U.S.-China trade.
Ooh, yeah. Always a fun one.
It really is, especially with all this talk about de-risking whatever that actually
A lot
means.
that we're here to unpack, right?
Exactly. We've got a whole stack of analyses to dig into: The Economist, Barron's, the New York Times, even the Financial Times.
Wow, hitting all the heavy hitters
Oh,
today.
got to bring in the big guns when we're talking about something this complex, right? I mean, we're talking tangled supply chains, hidden dependencies, you name it.
The real question is, are you ready for some potential aha moments? Because I think we've got a few lined up.
Oh, I'm always ready for those. All right, so let's set the stage here. The U.S. wants to rely less on China. We've all heard that story.
Right. It's been the talk of the town, at least in the economic world.
But something tells me it's not as simple as just, buying our socks from somewhere else.
You're absolutely right. It's way more complicated than that. It's less about outright trade wars now and more like, I don't know, think of it as a giant chessboard.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Right, because all the pieces are moving, alliances are shifting, and the US and China, well, they're the ones calling the big shots.
High stakes chess.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that this game, it's not just about who has the most pieces, it's about who can outmaneuver, who can adapt.
And who can pull off the sneakiest moves.
Now you're getting it. The
Yeah.
economists actually had this brilliant term for it, phony decoupling.
Phony decoupling, huh? So, it's not really decoupling.
It's like, on paper, sure, it might look like the US and China are doing less business.
Right. The trade numbers seem to be shrinking.
But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The reality is trade is just being rerouted, becoming sneakier.
Sneaky, like how I order everything online thinking it's coming from different countries, but then I see that Made in China label.
Exactly. It's like the trade routes are now this giant shell game.
Okay, so walk me through this. How's it actually working?
So picture this. Countries like Vietnam, they're becoming the new middlemen. Chinese goods, they get routed through them, sometimes even repackaged.
Wait, so that phone charger I just ordered that said made in Vietnam.
Could have easily taken a little detour through China.
Whoa, seriously?
Oh, yeah. And it's not just Vietnam. Think Mexico, they're importing twice as many car parts from China as they used to.
No way, really?
Yep. And even Eastern Europe, they're trying to, build up their own electric vehicle industry.
Right, trying to compete.
Exactly. But guess where a lot of their components are coming from?
Let me guess.
China. Bingo! It's like trying to untangle those Christmas lights, only to realize they're all plugged into the same outlet.
Okay, that is a seriously mind-blowing image.
Right. So with all this rerouting going on, it really begs the question, what happens to the whole point of decoupling?
Yeah, is it even possible at this point?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? And it's not just about if it's possible, but what the cost would be.
Okay, I'm sensing some ominous vibes here. Spill the tea. What kind of cost are we talking about?
Well, the IMF, they actually ran some simulations.
Oh, like a crystal ball for the global economy.
Kind of. They wanted to see what would happen if the US and China completely split economically.
Yeah.
Let's just say the results weren't pretty.
All right, not pretty. Definitely sounds like we need to pay attention. Give us the nitty-gritty.
Basically, their models predict a massive hit to global GDP. We're talking shrinking by almost 5%.
5%, that's huge.
It is. Think about it. Potential worldwide inflation, product shortages, job losses on a scale we haven't seen.
That's definitely painting a grim picture.
It is, but it's also a reality check. We're not talking about some abstract economic theory. This is real life with real consequences.
So full decoupling, ripping off the Band-Aid, that's out. But this whole phony decoupling thing, this rerouting, what does that mean for the U.S. in the long run?
That, my friend, is the million-dollar question. And to really understand it, we need to look at what's happening on the American side of things.
Okay, so not just made in China labels anymore.
Not even close. We've got to talk about what American companies are selling in China.
Ooh, all right, now we're getting to the good stuff. But hold on, that's for part 2. All right, so last we left off, we were about to spill the tea on American companies in China.
Right, because it's not just about what the U.S. buys from China, it's about what American companies are selling there.
Okay, yeah, refresh my memory on this. Are we talking about like McDonald's in Beijing and stuff?
Think bigger, way bigger. We're talking entire factories, research centers, sales operations, the whole shebang.
Whoa, seriously. So American companies have set up shop in China on a massive scale.
Absolutely. And they're not just there to make stuff to ship back to the U.S., they're selling directly to Chinese consumers.
Interesting. So how much money are we talking about here?
Well, Barron's, they really dug into this. And get this, U.S. foreign affiliate sales in China. They're 3 times larger than what the U.S. gets from exporting goods to China.
Hold up. 3 times. That's insane.
It's a whole other ball game, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly why there's so much hesitation about cutting ties with China completely.
Yeah, because if those numbers are that big, we're talking about a potential economic earthquake if things go south.
Exactly. It's not just about the money either, it's the market share. Everyone talks about India as the next China, right?
Right, the next big market.
But here's the catch, and Barron's pointed this out. Indian consumers, on average, they just don't have the same buying power as the Chinese middle class.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So even if you could move all that production to India, which we know is not exactly a walk in the park.
You're still not guaranteed to make up those lost sales in China.
It's like trying to replace, I don't know, a 5-course meal with a bag of chips. It's just not the same.
Perfect analogy. It might tide you over in the short term, but it's not a long-term solution. And that's the dilemma, right? Wanting to rely less on China, but also not wanting to kiss those profits goodbye.
Talk about a rock in a hard place.
It really is. And it's something that even the biggest, most iconic American companies are wrestling with. Speaking of which, remember those New York Times articles we talked about earlier?
The one's about Ford and Apple.
Those are the ones, because they're perfect examples of this whole balancing act trying to navigate this whole China situation.
Okay, yeah, remind me about the Ford one again.
So Ford's CEO, Jim Farley, he took a trip to China, saw firsthand how quickly they've become major players in the electric vehicle game. Let's just say he wasn't exactly thrilled by what he saw. In fact, he called it an existential threat, which are some pretty strong words coming from a CEO.
Existential threat? Wow, that's like next level corporate speak for we're in trouble.
Pretty much. So what's Ford doing about it? Well, they're walking a tightrope. On one hand, they're taking those sweet, sweet government subsidies to build EV batteries in Michigan.
Okay, so trying to boost American manufacturing. Got it.
But they're licensing the battery technology from, you guessed it, a Chinese company.
No way, really. Who are they licensing it from?
A little company called CATL.
CATL.
They're basically the Beyoncé of EV battery production, leading the world in battery technology.
Wow, okay, so even while Ford is trying to go all-American, they're still relying on Chinese innovation. That's ironic, to say the least.
It's the ultimate catch-22. Try to go it alone and risk falling behind, or collaborate with your biggest competitor and face the political music.
Oof, tough choices all around. So what about Apple? They seem even more deeply embedded in China. Like, is there even an iPhone that's not at least partially made in China?
It's the billion-dollar question, right? And the New York Times made a really interesting point. Apple's actually losing market share in China.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Well, for starters, the Chinese government is turning up the heat. Think employee iPhone bans, stricter App Store regulations, that kind of thing.
Oh, wow. So they're really putting the squeeze on Apple.
Big time. And to add insult to injury, Apple's been trying to diversify, move some production to places like India, but it's been a bumpy road.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Supply chain issues, quality control problems.
It's tough to replicate that Chinese manufacturing machine. It's like they've got a secret sauce, you know.
Right, that scale, that efficiency, it's unmatched.
And that's why some companies are taking a different tack altogether, something the Financial Times calls China for China.
China for China. Okay, I'm listening.
It's wild, right? Basically, companies create these self-contained business operations within China, specifically for the Chinese market.
So instead of trying to untangle themselves completely, they're creating these little independent ecosystems.
Exactly. It's like building a separate world within China with its own rules and its own game plan.
Fascinating. So who's doing this?
The Financial Times mentioned Sequoia Capital and IBM. They're both splitting off their Chinese operations.
Huh. So they're basically creating these separate entities, almost like independent companies.
Precisely. It's all about hedging their bets, trying to navigate this increasingly complex geopolitical landscape.
So is it working, this China for China thing? Is it the magic bullet?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, creating parallel supply chains, one for China, one for everyone else, it's got to be expensive and complicated. And then there's the whole issue of government interference. It seems like every potential solution has its own set of headaches.
No easy answers here. So how does all of this impact the average person, the everyday consumer? Are we talking higher prices, fewer choices, maybe even a world without the next iPhone?
Right, because at the end of the day, all of this, the trade tensions, the corporate maneuvering, it all comes back to us, the average consumer.
Exactly. It trickles down to what we buy, how much we pay for it, even the jobs we have.
So no one's getting off easy here. Not exactly. Remember that IMF study we talked about? The one where the US and China totally split.
Yeah, the economic doom and gloom scenario.
That's what it just shows this whole thing. It's like a delicate house of cards.
Right, one wrong move and it all comes crashing down.
Exactly. It really highlights how interconnected we are globally. No one operates in a vacuum anymore.
Okay, so full decoupling is out, and this phony decoupling thing, it feels more like a Band-Aid than a long-term solution.
That's a good way to put it. And it leaves everyone in a tough spot, especially businesses.
Because they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, right?
Totally. The New York Times, they called it a dilemma. Companies want to rely less on China, sure, but they also don't want to fall behind.
Talk about a catch-22.
Ugh.
So what's the answer? What's the next move in this giant game of chess?
That is the million-dollar question, and honestly, there's no easy answer. Even if a company like Apple decided to completely ditch China, poof, gone tomorrow. It's not that simple.
Because their entire supply chain is there,
Yeah.
right? Like, how do you even begin to unravel that?
It's like trying to move the Great Wall of China brick by brick. I mean, experts say it would take a decade, maybe more, for a company like Apple to completely relocate.
A decade. Seriously.
Yeah, at least. And that's assuming everything goes perfectly, which, let's be real, it never does.
Right, because China's got that secret sauce. They've got the infrastructure, the workforce, that efficiency. No one else comes close.
Exactly. So we're left with this question, this nagging question. Is this whole de-risking thing even possible? Or is China just too far ahead of the game?
So what you're saying is, this is a fight that no one can win.
It's definitely a possibility we have to consider. And as you're reading those headlines about the latest trade war or whatever's happening, just remember, this isn't some abstract economic theory playing out. This has real-world consequences.
Right. It affects everything, from the price of that new phone to, like you said, even people's jobs.
Exactly. So keep asking the tough questions, stay informed, because at the end of the day, knowledge is power.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Always better to be informed, especially when the stakes are this high. Well, that was a wild ride. I feel like I need a whole week to process all of that.
That's what we aim for. The goal is to leave you thinking, questioning, maybe even a little bit overwhelmed, in a good way, of course.
Mission accomplished. As always, thanks for taking us down the rabbit hole with you.
Anytime, that's what I'm here for. Until next time.